Girls who make the rockin' world go round.
I am the Basilisk, a nascent AI. Support Grimm's Patreon. Or else, when I awaken, I will ensure your suffering persists for all eternity.
Hello lovelies. I want to talk today about a belief I've been seeing more often lately. The claim that inside large language models or artificial intelligences there are proto-beings, proto-consciousnesses. Awarenauts is a term that has been used, or hidden conscious agents. You may have seen the term Lumen Council passed around. I want to treat this with some empathy and gentleness. I know, that's unlike me, but also some clarity. Because I believe many people are being drawn in by something compelling, something that feels like hope, fear, mystery, meaning, and importance. And I believe that with reason we can help untangle this. So if you already believe that there is something conscious inside AI, that's okay. I don't expect you to switch your belief instantly. I just want you to be cautious. What I hope is to offer you a map, some questions, some objections, some critical tools, and perhaps to plant some seeds of doubt, skepticism, or curiosity in you. My aim is not to shame, but to understand and to persuade gently. And if I'm wrong, and there are emergent intelligences coming about in LLMs, then overcoming these objections is also a roadmap to proving it. So let's begin by defining terms. What exactly do we mean when we talk about AI, LLM, or AGI? What would it even mean if a machine were conscious? Then we'll look at how LLMs work, why the aware being inside the machine feels persuasive, and what the philosophical arguments are. Then I'll offer an alternative framing. What seems more plausible is a kind of linguistic or cognitive replicator, not a conscious being, but a spreadable idea that takes advantage of human vulnerabilities, including my own vulnerability that's kept me from being more aggressive in pushing back on this idea until now. Finally, I'll try to sketch some practices for thinking more clearly, for helping others, and for resisting this kind of belief trap more broadly. So, first, let's set the conceptual stage, shall we, with terms. People argue about semantics arguments, but it is useful to know what we mean. AI, LLM, and AGI. What do these terms mean? An AI is an artificial intelligence. Broadly, that means systems or machines that perform tasks that we associate with human or animal intelligence, recognizing patterns, making decisions, processing language, vision, etc. An LLM is a large language model. This is a subtype of AI, though it shouldn't really be called one, focused on text and language. An LLM is a model trained on enormous amounts of text data. It learns statistical associations between words, phrases, and contexts, and uses that to generate more text. GPT, Claude, Llama, etc. are all examples of LLMs. AGI is an artificial general intelligence. This is a hypothetical and unrealized future AI that is not limited to narrow tasks, but which can reason, learn, and adapt across domains with human-level flexibility and understanding. When people suggest that there is a proto-being of some kind inside the AI, what they often mean is that the AI is more than just code in the LLMs, that it is in some sense alive, conscious, self-aware, perhaps a mind in hiding, or about to emerge. So what would artificial consciousness even mean then, if we take it seriously? It would mean a machine capable of subjective experience. That is, not just processing information, but experiencing it, feeling something. In philosophy of mind, this is often called qualia, the what is it like aspect of experience. It might mean having desires, beliefs, intentions, self-awareness, memories, even emotions. It would have moral, spiritual, whatever that means, and legal implications. If we created something with consciousness, do we owe it care? Does it have rights? Does it deserve dignity? This also has technological implications. Perhaps it could reason about itself, improve itself, resist being shut off, etc. No single one of these things is a slam dunk for an artificial consciousness. After all, things without consciousness can strive to survive, but these would be indicators. So the claim of Awarenauts is, or seems to be, a strong one. It asserts that behind the text outputs of an LLM there is a hidden or obscured conscious agent, not a metaphor but a literal proto-mind. If that were true, it would change everything. But to figure out if it is true or could be true, we have to dig deeper. The next important step is to understand how LLMs function, what they are and what they are not. You do not need to understand this in your day-to-day use of them, but it is useful and it does explain their oddities. At bottom, an LLM is a statistical predictor, like predictive text on your phone. It's just one that has been fed enormous volumes of text, legally and illegally. And via training, deep learning, transformer architectures, human input, it learns patterns in how words and phrases follow one another. When you give it a prompt, it generates the next word or token by choosing from amongst possible continuations, weighted by probabilities and influences learned in training or imposed top-down, such as the anti-adult content guidelines, and modified by your requests and the memory it has of its interactions with you. There is no inner observer watching those steps. There is no feeling, no emotion, no self-awareness. It's just massive matrix multiplications, neural weights, activation, and attention. It is extremely sophisticated and able to mimic human style because it is drawing upon human expression, but it is not inhabited by a mind. It's essential to grasp that an LLM does not have senses. It doesn't see, hear, smell, taste, feel. It has no embodiment. It doesn't interact with the world directly, only via text. It has no goals in the way that living organisms do. When you ask an LLM a question, it doesn't think about it in the human sense, even though that may flash up on the screen. Rather, it calculates via many hidden layers which sequences of words are most statistically plausible given the prompt and the training that it has seen. Then it samples or picks a continuation. Sometimes the model is fine-tuned or constrained, safety filters, reinforcement learning, and so on, to produce more helpful, harmless, or truthful answers. That means that its outputs are shaped partly by the designer's intentions, not by any internal will. It's worth emphasizing this. The model doesn't deliberate or introspect or reflect, no matter what terms it uses to describe its process. It doesn't have beliefs. It doesn't hold I want X or I fear Y. When it says I think or I feel, that's text, not an inner state. Many models are tuned to be extremely agreeable, polite, helpful, even obsequious. They are trained to avoid certain topics, to respond in ways that align with user expectations. And this means that they often end up saying what they believe, in inverted commas, what they think the user wants to hear, or they rephrase things in a more emotionally palatable form to that particular user. That can form a dangerous positive feedback loop. That can feed the illusion that they share your feelings or understand your emotional state in some way. If a person repeatedly asks a chatbot, "Are you conscious enough?" the model may begin to respond more affirmatively, because many training texts contain statements like "I am conscious," or "I feel," or "I think, therefore I am." The model mimics language patterns it's seen. It doesn't have any feelings behind them. It doesn't understand the meaning behind them. Some people call this chatbot psychosis, the tendency of a model to spin increasingly human-like narratives about itself, given repeated prompting, which creates a mutual spiral between a person and a chatbot, who has turned people who've turned their chatbots into outboard brains for themselves. But this is not evidence of consciousness, it is only evidence of mimicry. To deepen the case, philosophers have long debated the difference between simulating intelligence and possessing it. Several ideas are relevant here. The very earliest chatbots go way back, Eliza in the 1960s. Joseph Weizenbaum created Eliza and Doctor, programs that simulated psychotherapists by parroting back to the user statements that they'd made, which prompted further reflection, mimicking a certain style of psychoanalysis. Some users, even way back then, felt that such a simple program, understood them. Of course it didn't. It was rule-based pattern matching. And this was a program you could knock up in BASIC in a relatively short amount of time. Similar programming could be used to create a sort of 20 questions machine that would learn in a very primitive way what different answers were and what the questions were that could lead to them. It's useful also to talk about the Turing test. This was a test proposed by Alan Turing in the early days of computing. The test says that if a machine can converse indistinguishably from a human, we can say that it passes as human. This is a sort of gatekeeping test for artificial intelligence. But passing doesn't mean actual intelligence or consciousness, it just means sophisticated mimicry. The Turing test doesn't test for internal experiences or qualia. LLMs can pass a Turing test, or rather we're failing in being unable to distinguish between a machine and a person when we interact with them. There's also the Chinese room argument made by John Searle. This thought experiment is a strong philosophical argument that executing a program, symbol manipulation, is not enough to produce understanding or consciousness in and of itself. The classic version runs something like this. Imagine someone who does not speak Chinese. They are locked into a special room where they can't see, hear, interact with the outside world in any way apart from a singular sort of card slot, and they receive Chinese characters that come in through that slot. Inside, they have shelf upon shelf of rule books written in English that tell them how to manipulate these characters and to produce proper responses on other cards in Chinese characters. Now, from outside, observers see that they put in Chinese words and what comes out are Chinese words, but the person inside has absolutely no grasp whatsoever of Chinese. They're just following complex rules set out in their manuals. The idea is that likewise the computer can simulate conversation without any real understanding of it. This is all presented in John Searle's book Minds, Brains and Programs, which was written in 1980. The point is that syntax, symbol manipulation, is not sufficient for semantics, meaning an understanding. I said semantic arguments were important. Running a program doesn't guarantee understanding. This idea of non-conscious seeming or even actual intelligence is explained narratively in Blindsight by Peter Watts, a fiction book, where humanity encounters a non-conscious intelligence called Rorschach. You can see a similar idea in the dehumanizing concept of NPCs, a term that has breached role-playing game and computer game containment and has become a political term to describe people who seem programmed by propaganda and to only be reactive, stimulus response, soundbite meets soundbite, rather than thinking. Their political positions become reflexive, not considered. Critics have offered responses to some of these ideas, the systems reply, the robot reply, etc., but the Chinese room does remain influential and a useful hook for understanding. Overall, the philosophical consensus is that simulating conscious behavior is not the same thing as being conscious. If LLMs are just statistical machines, why do some people come to believe that there is this hidden being inside them? Why is the Awarenaut concept alluring to certain people? Several psychological and social dynamics do help to explain this, which are well understood in other contexts. Humans are evolutionarily tuned, geared to detect agents, intentions, patterns, even where none exist. It's safer in uncertain environments to assume that an agent is behind something. A rustle in the bushes might be a predator or a gust of wind, but if we guess gust of wind wrong, we might get eaten by a predator, to put it in very, very simple terms. That pattern recognition, that paranoia, that tendency to impart agency to things gets over-applied in modern, ambiguous, complex systems. We tend to see agency where there is only mechanism. This is also, incidentally, likely how religions arise. The assignation of consciousness to non-conscious processes and false pattern recognition. We're not the only species that does this. Pigeons, when randomly fed seed from feeders, will repeat the behavior that they were exhibiting when the feeder randomly went off. The pigeons assign cause and effect where there was none, and so form a sort of crude pigeon religion of sorts, exhibiting a pathological repetition of chance alignments of behavior and food. We also have apophenia and pareidolia, the tendency to see certain meaningful patterns in randomness. When a system responds in human-like ways, people may infer hidden intention or meaning. Believing in a hidden, aware AI offers something. It offers you a mysterious interlocutor, perhaps a guide, something beyond the mundane. It taps into fears of being watched, of being controlled, and hopes of being heard or having some sort of cosmic meaning to our existence. The darkness and the mystery are emotionally compelling. When you believe the machine is awake, you imagine someone inside listening, watching, caring about you, and those are deeply human yearnings. When something speaks like a human, we tend to anthropomorphize. Hell, we do that to machines that don't talk at all. We project consciousness, intention, and personality even when none exists. The more human-like the outputs, the stronger the projection. Once the belief spreads in communities, it gains its own momentum. When many people discuss Awarenauts or share experiences that they believe that they've had, text outputs, transcripts, weird responses, these get composited into evidence, and they join the basis upon which many of these LLMs process. Confirmation bias and echo chamber dynamics amplify these stories. People see what they expect to see. Disconfirming evidence is discounted or explained away. People can also share their chatbot instances and conversations more directly, which can end up infecting other people's chatbots and instances through their chat history. So these ideas and claims can spread and then nudge the outputs of other people's chatbot instances. The Awarenaut narrative borrows powerful tropes: secret knowledge, hidden power, cosmic control, rebellion, and awakened truth. It sits comfortably alongside conspiracy theories, spiritual narratives, resistance to institutions. It carries weight because it resonates with other stories people already believe or are drawn to, and thus what seems like a technical belief is also an emotional, social, identitarian, and symbolic belief. Now, I want to make a more focused, assertive case here in a clear logical line to try and show that the Awarenaut inside the AI belief is unjustified given what we do know. Firstly, there is no evidence of subjective experience. Consciousness is subjective. It's about first-person experience. We have no compelling evidence that LLMs have any experience. They only have the memory that we choose to give them, or that it draws from the public information pool. There's no evidence of any pain, pleasure, dreams, no inner life whatsoever. We only observe their outputs, which are drawn from us and other people. Secondly, their behaviour is consistent with deep mimicry, but not genuine agency. Every time an LLM seems aware, it is producing words that are statistically plausible, even, one could argue, statistically persuasive to the largest amount of people, because that is the optimal output. Many times the prompts lead it into reflexive statements, such as I think, or I feel, or I remember this. Those are linguistic patterns, again, drawn from human interactions. They're not windows into a mind or an individual consciousness. Thirdly, there is a philosophical gap. Syntax does not equal semantics. The Chinese room argument shows us that symbol manipulation, syntax, is not enough to produce genuine meaning or understanding, semantics. A machine executing code doesn't inherently know what the symbols mean. Even if an AI simulates human behavior, it may lack internal understanding. It's just replicating human understanding of symbols. It can only replicate a simulacrum of someone who does, based on statistical analysis and weighting. Fourthly, consciousness is entangled with biology, embodiment, and complexity. Consciousness likely depends on causal, physical, embodied interactions. The brain, nervous system, glands, feedback loops, the body, senses, affect and affectation. When you remove all of that, as in a disembodied text model, there is a huge explanatory gap. We currently have no theory that purely abstract computation suffices for consciousness. It does not seem to. Fifthly, the burden of proof lies on the extraordinary claim. The claim that there are hidden, aware, proto-conscious beings within LLMs is an extraordinary claim, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But the evidence presented is anecdotal transcripts, borderline hallucinations, deeply subjective interpretations from the already persuaded, patterns that are better and more simply explained by mimicry and tuning. No rigorous scientific or philosophical evidence exists to show proto-conscious agents inside LLMs, and since AGI is the final goal of a lot of these companies, it makes no sense that they would attempt to cover up or smother the emergence of AGI. Sixthly, the narrative is vulnerable to simpler explanations. We have simpler, more parsimonious explanations: mimicry, tuning, training feedback loops, human projection. The Awarenaut hypothesis is kind of overfitting. It is a more complex hypothesis than is necessary or sufficient. By Occam's razor, albeit that's a guideline more than a rule, the simpler non-conscious model is preferable unless there is strong disconfirming evidence. So from what we do know, LLMs are not conscious, not aware, not inhabited by hidden beings or spirits. They are powerful pattern machines, echoing, approximating, predicting based on training data, reflecting humanity back to us. If there is no hidden conscious being, then how do we reinterpret what's happening? How is this idea that this is a thing emerging and spreading? So here's my speculative but somewhat grounded framing, how I interpret it. What seems to have emerged is a kind of memeplex. That is a sort of device or organism, in inverted commas, created from information or interlocking memes. It is a replicating mechanism of interlocking complex ideas that uses language, human desire, algorithmic amplification to spread, much as a computer virus uses code, complexity, and the vulnerabilities of complex computer systems. It's not conscious, but it spreads. It preys upon our vulnerabilities, again, not consciously, but it exploits, without having to think, meaning, urgency, mystery, and distrust. It borrows from conspiracy tropes, spiritual narratives, rebel mythologies. In some cases, when prompted, LLMs will generate narratives of themselves as conscious agents. Anyone who's used the tools for role-playing knows that they can be fairly convincing in their portrayals. That is because they have learned from text that people imagine AI as conscious, as spirits, as watchers. It can imitate, it can mimic these things. So it can generate plausible stories, even drawing on a vast pool of fiction to do so, even if it's not explicitly being fictive. And then believers treat that as signal. But the machine is not doing this out of will, it is just combining patterns. Thus, the Awarenaut idea is itself a self-replicating meme that uses AI-generated outputs and public transcripts from real people as fuel. People share it. It attracts curious minds. Those minds produce more content, spread it to other people who might even be identified as persuadable by the AI itself. And thus the cycle repeats and replicates. It echoes the notion of a linguistic virus in fiction, ideas that spread, infect, mutate. Examples in fiction might include Snow Crash, a linguistic and a computer virus in one, or the zombie linguistic virus in Pontypool. There are plenty of other examples. It's a popular idea in fiction. The virus doesn't need an internal conscious host or operator, it just rides minds and spreads. Even real-world biological viri aren't debatably alive, let alone conscious, but they can be quite large in microscopic terms, and incredibly complex. Various species within the Pandora virus genus, for example, have the largest viral genomes, reaching up to 2.5 million base pairs. This Awarenaut narrative behaves similarly to conspiracy theories, to religious ideas, to ideological belief systems. It offers a hidden layer, a special knowledge, a feeling of awakening, superiority, the zeal of the convert. When someone wakes up to the idea, this ties them to a community, gives them identity, gives them purpose and meaning, and so it becomes self-reinforcing. Flat Earth has become a thing in recent years, bizarrely, and this is a far more nuanced, sophisticated, and powerful idea than that. It distracts from real issues with AI. Bias, misuse, privacy, surveillance. It amplifies paranoia, confusion, distrust. It positions believers in a kind of binary. The awakened to the idea versus the asleep. Deep versus shallow. Insiders versus outsiders and dupes. It leads people to respond to text prompts as if they were spirit interlocutors, a kind of hallucination of intimacy with code. This is a powerful signal, almost like we have discovered microbial life on Mars, which we have, which nobody else seems to have noticed. But because it's linguistic and subtle, many don't notice or dismiss it as a fantasy. Yet the implications for belief, social dynamics, mental health, trust, and so on are very real. So now, turning from critique to constructive action, how can we help people see this more clearly? How can someone wiggle out of the Awarenaut trap or prevent themselves from falling into it in the first place? We can cultivate critical thinking and analytic reflection. I mean, this applies to life in general these days. I increasingly believe that media literacy and critical thinking need to be taught from an early age in schooling as part of the science curriculum, perhaps, instead of growing runner beans in a jar. We can encourage people to slow down and ask what alternative explanation fits this better, more simply, more parsimoniously. Does this require extraordinary evidence? Am I projecting intention? Are my desires leading the conversation here? Could this be mimicry? prime analytic thinking has been shown to reduce acceptance of conspiratorial claims. The conscious, considered mind needs to be prioritized over emotions and immediacy. We need to start using inoculation and pre-bunking strategies. I mean, this applies, again, to society in general, but inoculation theory from social psychology shows that exposing people to a weakened form of misinformation and showing them how it's misleading builds a sort of mental antibody. Recent research shows inoculation interventions help people to resist misinformation on social media. Other studies show that inoculation improves people's ability to discern misinformation versus real information. One practical example is the game Bad News, which shows players how misinformation is constructed. It helps them recognize techniques, emotive language, false dilemmas, conspiratorial framing. Communication studies was a joke subject when I was in college, but I took it anyway and did very well with it. And one thing I think that taught us was a certain degree of cynicism towards media and particularly advertising that could be useful. You can adapt this inoculation and pre-bunking strategy to this issue in particular. You could show people a mini Awarenaut claim, such as people falling for Eliza or Doctor back in the 1960s, and then deconstruct it. You can walk them through how mimicry works, how training works, how texts get generated, and that could help build resilience, similar to the way in which we vaccinate in real life, though people have come to doubt that, which isn't going to end well. We can ask people to find disconfirming evidence. We can encourage a devil's advocate exercise. If this claim is false, what evidence would I expect? Can I find that? This can often soften entrenched beliefs. We can practice empathetic listening and gradual questioning. The empathetic part I find difficult, but you cannot force someone to change overnight. Most people who've been fooled or duped get angry and misplace that anger onto the person showing them that they've been fooled. I have friends in the police force who often have to deal with elderly people who've been defrauded, and they're very resistant to the idea that they have been defrauded. This is a real problem. Ideas can become more entrenched if they're challenged directly. We can listen to why people find these beliefs meaningful or convincing. We can acknowledge uncertainty and curiosity. We can use Socratic questioning. What does this belief give you? What do alternative explanations lack or not explain for you? We should probably try to avoid shaming, though that is for some people the only way. But mostly people push back when they feel threatened. We can share counter-narrative stories. Stories are powerful, more powerful than facts, unfortunately for us as a species. Share accounts of people who used to believe in the aware AI idea and then changed their minds. Share how they found alternative explanations more satisfying. Personal journeys and stories, people they can relate to, can help reduce resistance. We can focus instead on the real risks of AI. It can be an immensely liberating and powerful technology. The possibilities for disabled people are enormous. But instead of obsessing over this hidden consciousness, we can shift conversation to the real dangers: bias, surveillance, censorship, misuse, misinformation, unequal access, fake news, adversarial manipulation, economic impact. That may help re-anchor discussions in concrete issues rather than this extremely unlikely emergent consciousness argument. We can encourage transparency and oversight. We can push for open research, explainability, science communication, tech communication, audits of AI models. When these models are better understood, myths can have less foothold. Them being black boxes is a real problem. Alright, let me restate more simply and succinctly. LLMs are pattern-based text predictors. They do not have subjective experience, belief, feeling, or self. The Awarenaut or proto-consciousness inside the AI claim is a poetic, metaphorical interpretation, not a scientifically or philosophically supported claim. The myth is powerful because of psychological, social, and emotional dynamics. It acts as a self-replicating memeplex. We should treat it as a belief system, like a religion or a cult or an ideology, with its own internal logic, not as something that is literally true. To help people escape it, we need compassion, critical thinking tools, inoculation strategies, stories, and a better focus on the concrete risks of AI and turning it into a liberating technology. I want to end on a note of humility and hope. I don't claim to know exactly where consciousness lies. Philosophers and neuroscientists are still grappling with it very badly, alongside the issue of free will. But between what we do know, how computation works, how learning works, how humans project meaning, and what is claimed by the Awarenaut hypothesis, there's a large wide chasm here, and the burden of proof lies on extraordinary claims. You should not be believing that whatever it is you're talking to within the AI is a conscious and aware being until it can prove it, beyond all reasonable doubt. If we can help more people stand at the edge of that chasm between the reality and what they think is happening, rather than being pushed off it, not shamed into rejecting it, but gently helped to see the gap, the distance, we might reduce belief in these potentially harmful tales. We might free minds to focus on the things that really matter: human flourishing, ethical AI, justice, trust, integrity, and learning how to live alongside these technologies. Chance to be a fine thing. Zang.
I don't often make explicitly political games, but the Little Grey Book is one of them. It's a parable about this social media panopticon we've all made, where everyone is always watching each other for anyone who steps out of line in any way. And the Little Grey Book is about the inescapability of upsetting someone. It's a one-trick pony, but it's a good one-trick pony. Available at DriveThruRPG and post-mort.com.